The next verse says, "Among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart and failing of eyes and sorrow of mind." And again, this map shows the expulsions of Jews. The dates here around about 1497, so this is in the 1500s. Each one of these arrows represents an event when Jews were thrown out of the land where they were living because they were being persecuted and people didn't want them there. And this has happened time and time again to the Jewish people over history, exactly fulfilling this verse. "You shall find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest." A trembling heart and failing of eyes and sorrow of mind. And it goes on in verse 66, "Thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. In the morning thou shalt say, Would God it were evening, and at even thou shalt say, Would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see." Anti-Semitism is in fact a feature of the world even today. And we don't have to go into the detail of the horrors that we know took place in the Holocaust and in the Second World War. Those events that have taken place on the Jewish people have so accurately fulfilled in a remarkable way this prophecy of Deuteronomy chapter 28. Now, the book of Leviticus is also in that part of the Old Testament of the law of Moses, and there's a very similar chapter in chapter 26, and there's just one extra detail here that I'd like to pick up. In verse 44, it says, "And yet for all that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them. For I am the Lord their God." Israel were God's chosen people and still are. And God had made a promise, a covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the forefathers of Israel. And God said, "I'm not going to break that covenant. So even if you disobey me and don't keep my laws, you will be scattered, but I won't destroy you." Verse 45, "I will for their sakes remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. I am the Lord." So God promised not to destroy them. And that's an amazing thing in itself, that actually the Jews have survived, scattered throughout the peoples of the earth, and yet they still have an identity after 2,000 years of scattering. Mark Twain was amazed when he thought about this. Now, Mark Twain, I don't think was a religious man in any way, but he wrote this essay. You may not be able to read that. I'll read it to you. And this sums it up for me in a remarkable way. He says, "If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1/4% of the human race. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of. But he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also very out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvellous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendour, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out. And they sit in twilight now and have vanished. The Jew saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? A very interesting observation from a man writing in 1897 about the Jewish people. What is the secret of his immortality? Why is it the Romans passed away? Why is it the Greek Empire disappeared? Why is it that you can't shake hands with a Babylonian or an Assyrian, but you can with a Jew? Well, perhaps the secret of the Jews' immortality is that God had made important prophecies concerning his people. And in Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 11, we read this: I am with thee, saith the Lord, to save thee. Though I make a full end of all nations whither I have scattered thee, yet will I not make a full end of thee, but I will correct thee in measure, and will not leave thee altogether unpunished. So God was not going to allow them to be destroyed. And in verse 10 of chapter 31 of Jeremiah, he says, Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. That ship is called the Exodus, and just around the time of the Second World War, that ship left Europe with refugees seeking to find safety in the land of Israel. The British at the time had mandate over Palestine and wouldn't let Jews return to the land that they wanted to go to. And so that ship was turned away, and it went around the world, and it became almost iconic of the fact that the Jews had a terrible situation. They were fleeing from Europe and all the persecution there, and they had nowhere to go. But God had written this prophecy thousands of years before, saying that he that scattered Israel will gather him. And again in Ezekiel, I will bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries, and will bring them to their own land and feed them upon the mountains of Israel, by the rivers, and in all the inhabited places of the country. And if you go to Israel today, it is an inhabited place. They have cultivated their fields. There's a picture of Tel Aviv, a modern and bustling city full of Jewish people who have returned to their ancient homeland. The Jews have been gathered out of the countries and returned to their land. In 1948, the State of Israel was declared by David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister, and that's what he said at the celebration. We hereby proclaim the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine to be called the State of Israel. And that event took place in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. In Luke chapter 21, this time in the New Testament, these are the words of Jesus. And he's speaking about the events that would happen in Jerusalem very shortly after his time. But he also looks forward to a future day in verse 24. And he says, They shall fall by the edge of the sword, shall be led away captive into all nations, and we've seen that happened. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, and for 2,000 years Jerusalem has been in Gentile hands. The Jews have not had control of it. And Jesus said that would happen until, it would come to an end, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And when those times are fulfilled, then the Jews will have Jerusalem again. Well, in 1967, there was a war in Israel, and although the Jews did have parts of Israel, they had not got, at that time, control of Jerusalem. And during that 6-day war, the Jews regained control of that city, and they have controlled it ever since. That prophecy is certainly being fulfilled, and the opportunity, the times of the Gentiles, and their opportunity to learn about the Lord Jesus Christ is coming to an end. One of the Bible students who was writing in 1848 was able to look at the Bible was able to look at these prophecies that we've looked at this evening, and although in 1848 there was no nation of Israel on the horizon, the possibility of them returning to the land was certainly not really there. And he was able to say this, speaking purely from his knowledge of Bible prophecy. The pre-adventual, and that means pre-adventual, the second coming of Jesus. So before the second coming of Jesus, he says, the colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and Jewish colonists will return there in unbelief of the messiahship of Jesus and of the truth as it is in him. He could see that this must happen by looking at Bible prophecy, and 100 years later, it happened. He also wrote this, which is even more amazing. I know not whether the men who at present contrive the foreign policy of Britain entertain the idea of assuming the sovereignty of the Holy Land and of promoting its colonization by the Jews. Their present intentions, however, are of no importance one way or the other, because they will be compelled by events soon to happen to do what under existing circumstances, heaven and earth combined, could not move them to attempt. He was able to predict, by looking again at Bible prophecy, that he thought that the British power would be instrumental in helping the Jews return to their land. And he wrote that 100 years before it happened. What did happen in 1917 is that, as a favour to an important Jew that had helped the British people, the Foreign Minister, Lord Balfour, made a declaration. And in it he said, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's Government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's Government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national homeland for the Jewish people. And that declaration of intent from the British government eventually brought forth fruit in 1948, when the Jewish people were able to declare the state of Israel and a homeland for the Jews. They had indeed been regathered from the nations of the earth, just as Bible prophecy had said would happen. In Zechariah chapter 12, again, a latter day prophecy, it says in verse 3, in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Now, Jerusalem continues to be a controversial place. Many people would like to claim it. It is a holy city for Christians, for Jews, and also for Muslims. And many of the problems in the world today, certainly in that part of the world, are around because Israel does have occupation of that land.